Hi, my name is Stephen Kirsting, and on this episode of Your Shot My Way, we have a baby portrait by Colleen. And looking at this portrait, a couple things strike me first, and that is we have a lot of brighter highlights up here, while the main exposure looks slightly underexposed. And we have some skin texture issues, some blotchiness, some color, pink areas, some hot pixels, and some general minor things we would want to clean up. So starting out in Lightroom after import, we can take care of a few of these things real easy with the clone tool, and I'm in the healing mode. I tend to use the healing mode exclusively. Looks like there's a hot pixel here, so we'll take care of that one as well. That's a little something on the nose. See what that looks. Pick a better spot for that. Take care of this one. And we have to be careful here that we get a texture that is similar. Let's just make this smaller. You don't want to be putting skin texture there that doesn't belong. Alright, we have some other areas down here we could look at around the mouth, and we could try to fix those here with the clone tool or patch tool. But in the heal mode, it's blurring out the lip line and smearing the red out into the other. We can switch it over to clone, but that's even worse. So we're just going to stop with that tool, get rid of that one, and see where we're at. Alright, I think I would probably try to pull down some of these highlights up on the bandana and bring up some shadows, even out this exposure a little bit, and I think that looks like a pretty good starting point. We've got one on the chin we could probably take care of with a clone stamp. That works pretty well. Alright, we could set white balance, and the Lightroom white balance picker does not set white or black or anything else. It just takes the RGB levels and equalizes them. Right now they're 75.7, 73.6, 71.3, and after I do this, they're 75.7, 75.9, 75.6. So they're not white. They'd be up in 95 to 100% RGB if they were actually white. And so I actually think Photoshop's a better tool for this, but this isn't a bad starting point. It's still showing that at least the whites are slightly underexposed, which I generally want them. I don't want them to be clipped at 100% unless it's a specular highlight. So we'll readdress and look at white balance in Photoshop where we can do a better job. But this doesn't look too bad. Alright, so from here we're going to go over to Photoshop where we can address some of these other issues better. So to do that, Command E, we'll edit with Lightroom adjustments, and we'll open it up into Photoshop. Okay, now that we're into Photoshop, first thing I want to do is I want to address some of the cloning issues that in this image before we proceed beyond that point. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab my tablet and I'm going to use a bunch of shortcuts. And I'll try to say what the shortcuts are. Some of them are programmed into my tablet, some of them so I don't have to do much, but it's Shift, Option, Command, N will automatically create a new layer, or we can go down here and create a new layer. And the first thing I want to do is I want to grab this clone stamp, S tool, and we're going to zoom in on the eyes. We're going to address a few of these issues. Alt to sample a spot, and then we'll just paint that in. Current and below, okay. Paint that in. And we'll We'll select this spot here. Take care of that little bit. All right, we'll scroll over. We can take care of this spot. I have my pens set to pressure set to flow. It's the only thing I use. I don't use size or shape dynamics. Take care of a few of these tiny little areas here real quick. Take care of this spot in the eye. Alright, this catch light is problematic because it's right on the rim of the iris. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my clone stamp properties. I'm going to flip it vertically, and I'm going to select a spot that is just about the same location but on the bottom. Right there. And this way, when I paint in the iris, the edge of the iris is also replaced in the right location. All right, undo that so I don't forget later. All right, zoom out a little bit, see what we've got. All right, for initial clone stamping, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and address the background. We're going to use the quick select tool, and I'm just going to drag it across here. That's not going to work. We have to have the background selected. Let's create a new layer. Background selected. Grab that real quick and dirty. Use the Alt key, and we will deselect these areas. There's certainly more refined ways of going about this. Right, I'm going to refine the edge real quick, add a little couple pixel feather to this. It looks pretty good. And then we're going to grab the stamp tool, make the stamp much larger, Control Alt, and click and drag on a Mac. If it's not a Mac, then you could use it's a right mouse click and click drag to resize. Don't know why that's doing that. Right, Command deselect. Looks like I missed some areas with my selection. Not a big deal. And of course, you might want to be more particular about this. I'm using a very soft brush, so when I get close to edges and stuff, light pressure doesn't cause the edges of the brush to show as much. Undo that one. Alright, close enough for the demo. We'll go ahead and grab the wand tool again. We'll clean up this side. Use the Alt key to get rid of this. You could use quick masking or whatever suited you better. We're just making a quick selection. We're going to feather this a couple pixels. The reason I'm feathering the selection is because those areas of the clothing and the ear and such are not terribly sharp, so I don't want to create them a sharp edge by cloning and stamping. Grab the stamp tool, grab the sample up there, and real quick, like, make sure we're not getting into the ear. We want to keep sampling so that we don't create those repeating lines, patterns that happens. And if I mess up, which I do all the time, I'll just go over it again. Try to make sure we don't get that repetition. That happens all the time in cloning. So just keep sampling. Alt click. I'll replace most of that stuff. You probably could use a content aware fill, possibly. Something like that. Command D, deselect. Alright, so there's our background fixes. That one over there looks kind of crappy. Alt. That's a little better. A little better, and boy, I should have done that on that new layer, but I did it on the original. That's usually a mistake. But we can get rid of that layer then. Alright. And at this point we have clones that. Okay, so Shift Alt Command E. I don't know why my shortcuts are not. There we go. Shift Alt Command E takes everything that's visible and pastes it as a new layer. Actually, I guess it did work. Delete. My computer is just a little slow. So that layer, hold the option, is everything below. Alright, I'm going to take that layer and duplicate it, Command J, and I'm going to do frequency separation. So we're going to turn this top layer off, turn this layer on, and we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And we're going to pick a pixel level that gets rid of the details, but not too much. We want to smooth out the skin tones without losing the details. Okay, right about about 3.5, somewhere around there looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to go to the next layer, image, check the mode. It should be 16-bit because it came from Lightroom. It is. And then we're going to go down to apply image. Here we want to select our blurred layer, which is layer 2. We want to select invert. We want to select add because it's 16-bit. It should be 2 and 0. Okay, and this is essentially just a high pass layer, and it is going to be our texture. So I'm going to call this one texture, and we'll call this one color. All right, take our texture layer, we're going to convert that to linear light. All right, so now these two layers should look the same. I'm going to group these as our background. Command G to group them. It won't let me because it's locked. All right, so now if I turn these two off, there should be no difference. If you notice a difference, losing fine details, let's zoom in. If you notice a difference between the frequency separation layers and the original, then you've probably blurred out the color layer too much, and you might want to redo that. All right, I'm going to turn that off. We'll go up here, I'm going to put that in a group. I'm going to call this colors. Colors. Put this one in a group. going to call that textures. All right, and there's three things: color or hue, texture, and detail, and then brightness. And we're going to have another group for that as well. Okay, the first thing we want to work on is the colors. Let's grab the lasso tool. That's what I want. It's already set to about 11 pixels, so that would be all right. Just like that. I'm going to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we're going to set a level that looks pretty good there. Say OK, and we could redo that area there, and now I can just hit Command F to reapply the blur, and I can do that as many times as I choose. Let's go ahead and readdress some of these areas. Command F. Adjust this blotchy chin area. I'm going rather quickly. You probably wouldn't want to pick as large areas. You might want to work in smaller areas. And anytime you get close to a detail, you have to be a little more careful. You know, an edge, an eye, something like that. And I'm just really quickly going through and dealing with color. Right. Now, if this isn't having the effect I'm expecting, chances are it's in the texture layer. So don't go too nuts with the skin softening at this point with the colors. Now, if you have Forever and a Day, perhaps advanced micro selection, cloning, dodging highlights, dodge and burning techniques would generate better results. But time is money, and we don't want to spend more time, and personally my results aren't any better if I try to go with real advanced dodge burning techniques. Micro level, I don't have the patience or the ability, apparently. So this is, I use frequency separation most of the time. Alright, so there we've evened out most of our colors, and we can see the difference here. And that's all been on this color layer. Now there's a bit of pink in the skin in areas that I might not want as much of. I could try to address that with a hue saturation layer, but because there's pink that I do want, that's not really a great option. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer into here, and I'm going to grab a brush. Let's make that brush a little smaller, and I'm just going to sample from nearby, paint that in, get rid of some of that color. Make sure you sample frequently so that you're not drawing what appears to be just a solid color line. Right. Right. Grab a really large brush. Sample some colors up here on the forehead. Tone that down a little bit. Okay. And let's see what we've got. All right, color-wise, I think that's looking pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and minimize our color layer at this moment. And I'm going to go up to texture. And we look at the texture. Let's see where we have things we might not want. Now I have a couple options with the texture. I can clone stamp on the texture layer, grabbing the stamp tool. Make sure we're on current only, and then we can replace skin texture with skin texture from nearby. Now you want to make sure it's from nearby. You don't want to put cheek texture on the nose or something like that. But we can quickly go around and address texture issues with the clone stamp. Resize this a little bit. Sample here. Place those. Sample up here. You can see what looked to be color issues was really texture issues. Right, scroll around real quick. We can replace a few of these other areas over here. And take a quick look. Yeah, that looks pretty good. At this point, I've got some areas I'm not happy with there, and to address that, I'm going to put a mask on the texture layer. And I'm going to grab a brush, switch to black, and I'm going to carefully remove the textures in this area. I'm just masking them out. Try not to overdo this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and come down here, make the brush a little smaller, and I'm going to fade these underlines out. I'm not going to remove them. That makes, looks too fake. I'm just going to fade them down a bit. All right. And maybe we'll get rid of some of this texture there. Just fade it down a little bit. Okay. Now, often with babies or over sharpening these details and stuff, sometimes the skin texture is going to be more than you want overall, and you would like to tone it all down to an extent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer, Command J. I'm going to take that layer, I'm going to put a black, delete that mask, I'm going to put a black mask over it. I'm going to take this lower level, the one we've done all our editing to originally, I'm going to reduce its opacity. And somewhere in there. So I brought it down to, about 90%. You can do whatever you want. Right? Then we're going to take this top layer and we're going to switch our brush and white. We're going to paint in the details, the sharpness back where we want to keep it. Definitely the eyes. Often might be eyebrows. And setting these just a little bit above. That's just a touch there. And almost certainly I'm going to keep the lips. Alright. It looks like I could address those locations there with the clone stamping. I'll leave that for you. What the heck, it's not that big a deal. Let's create a new layer. Move it all the way to the top. I think this was a mistake layer. Delete that one. Let's clone stamp right there. Okay. At this point, let me make sure I brought up those lips. Finish bringing up those lips. Brush. Okay. So now we have dealt with color and texture. The next thing we want to do is we want to deal with highlights, the eyes, the catch lights, and the overall toning. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to do actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the eyes. Let's go all the way down here to the original image. I'm going to select this layer, use the marquee tool, which is set to a circle. We're going to get rid of the feather radius. Select the eyes. I can hold shift, it makes it draw a circle. I don't have to be too particular about this. I'm going to shift again, which will add. I'm going to Command C. I'm going to create a new layer, bring that to the top, Command V, and we should have our eyes copied to the top layer. I'm going to then go to Image, Adjustments, Shadows and Highlights. Could have just copied the whole image, but that makes your file a lot larger. We're going to see here, we're going to adjust for shadows and highlights. On those eyes. Alright, and I'm going to go with a lot of mid-tone contrast. That's like the clarity in Lightroom. I'm going to put a black layer mask on this. And I'm going to paint this in with a brush tool. Large, soft. Because our catch lights are upper left, we want most of our highlighting to be lower right. This is really, we're just bringing out details in the eye, and we can do most of the eye at this point. And probably doesn't look like we're doing much at this point, but we are. I'm going to put this in a group over here. I'm going to call this I'll call it brightness, I guess. Right. Inside our brightness layer, I'm going to add another layer. And in here, I'm going to use the brush on white. Make it small. I'm going to get rid of those umbrella characters. That umbrella characteristic. You can see all the ribs of the umbrella. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to create a shape tool here. Fill it with black, no stroke, and draw a circle. about like that. I'm going to place it right over the pupil. I'm going to go to filter. Looks like blur is still my last one. Command F. Blur that down a bit. And I'm going to position it over the catch light. I'll go ahead and take that opacity down just a little bit. All I'm trying to do is knock that catch light down because it's a little bit heavy, a little bit large for my taste. I'm going to option drag that one over to here, and I'll create another layer. Then I can position that one separately as well. That just knocks those catch lights down a bit. So we started, I'll merge that one down, Command E merges it down. So there's our fixes. Let's take a look at the whole picture. And I think you'll agree that looks a little better as far as the catch lights. It looks like this one, that layer needs a little more white. Needs a little more white under there. Bring that one up to match. And I'm going to take that edge off of that right there where I overdid it. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. Right, and I can merge all those down. Actually, what I'll do is I'll group these inside there, and I will call them eyes. Now I'm going to take this, I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer. I'm going to bring the brightness up. I'm going to create another curves adjustment layer. Bring the brightness down. And we're going to apply image. And what we're doing here is dodging and burning. Advanced dodging and burning by using apply image. I'm going to take this, which is the brighter, go to image, apply image, and we want this time we want multiply, we want merged for all layers, and I want to decide, am I bringing up highlights or am I bringing up shadows? In this image I want to bring up highlights just to give some more detail and interest, so we don't want the mask inverted. All right, I'm going to go to the other one, image, apply image, and this time we're going to invert it. It's using the same settings because in this one I want to bring down the shadows. All right, and if we look at our masks, that's what my mask looks like for the shadows and for the highlights. And this mask is what prevents me from creating a really blotchy image when I do dodging and burning. Alright, so my dodging and burning can only come up to this level. If I don't like this level, if it's not enough, I can always come in here and adjust this curve as I see fit later. But what I don't want to do is brush on this mask. So I'm going to command group that. I'm going to command group that one as well. I'm going to put a masks on those. Alt click on the mask icon, makes it a black and a black. Alright, so now we have highlights first. What do we want to bring up? Grab our brush tool, painting on the group mask, soft brush, low flow, and we're going to bring up the nose a bit, bring up the cheek, make that cheek a little rosier, maybe a touch on the chin, maybe a bit on the forehead. Gonna come down in here, bring up all these areas. All right. And just a touch. It's real easy to overdo this kind of stuff. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with the shadows. Paint those in where I want a little more. Maybe around the nose. Maybe on the side of the cheek. Maybe along the hairline here. Maybe I want to bring up some of the whites along this bandana back here. Alright, that looks pretty good. Go back to our eyes, and I think I'm going to leave that for brightness overall, but down here on the eyes, I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to paint with the brush tool, real easy, light-like, bring up this lower side. Make the brush even smaller. Just a little catch light, and we want it opposite of the catch light. I'm going to blur that a little bit. I think 3-4 pixel I had set as my blur is too high. So I'm going to set this down a little bit. Okay. Go to my Dodge Burns. That's the darkening. Kind of darken up this section of the eye a little bit. And we'll brighten up this, just the highlights. It's real easy to overdo all this stuff. All right, take a look at where we're at. All right, I think this is about where I would finish with this image. All right, a little bit of cloning work could be done there. Create a new layer, stamp, make sure current and below is set. Don't know how I messed that up, but I did. But I could fix it anytime. And of course, this being on its own layer means I can go back in and mask it out where I've gone over the skin. And that's the big advantage of using layers. Where I was sloppy, I can fix it. All right, we can take all these layers, there to there, group those. So this is our original image. This is where we're at. Maybe a little overbaked, and it's usually best to come back to this a little later. And if it's overbaked, we can always come in, turn all those adjustments down in the group. We can open it up, and we can fine-tune any setting after the fact to help minimize our excessive edits. But I think this looks pretty good at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and save it out. Actually, one more adjustment. I mentioned I'm going to white balance. Levels. If I use the white dropper in Lightroom, in Photoshop, and I put it on a white point that should be white, catch light, or in this case, this point on the bandana, and I use a black dropper and I put it on a spot that should be black, such as the iris, the pupil, that pupil is going to be black. If I come over here and I grab the info tool, it is zeros. If I grab the white dropper, it is 255 where I set it. Right? That doesn't mean it's the desired color balance or white balance, but that means this is what the white balance of this image is. I don't normally want 255, I want about 245. I may or may not want the blacks. I may or may not want that much contrast. Let's just leave that alone. And I may not like the effect everywhere. I'm going to tone this down just a bit on those highlights in the bandana because I don't want it to be distracting in that area. Right, that is correct white balance. Doesn't mean the desired white balance, it means correct white balance. I'm going to leave it alone for this image. Okay, close this image out, save, and we're back into Lightroom. So there is our finished image as edited in Photoshop, and then our image as recorded, imported with just a couple minor fixes in Lightroom. Okay, this has been a Your Shot My Way, and I hope you have found this beneficial. Until next time, when I'll see you again, Stephen Kirsting, and I hope you have a great day.